record and go through a little more of this. Okay, so we were talking about the ground, the phenomenology of the person in its entirety, development, culture, relationships, all of that, which I think my grandmother's hands really describes actually some of the ground of what it means, for example, to be a person of color in our culture, right? It really describes that phenomenology of the person. But this is, which is just a way for you to begin to envision it. But it's true for every person who walks in to see you, anyone who comes to see you. So the figure always emerges from the ground. It's what the individual selects, how it's chosen, what they decide they want to work on. So they're going to be able to come up with something to make sense of the world at this moment in time. And the figure will emerge from that very undifferentiated background. In other words, even if the person thinks that they are clear about this particular issue and how it relates to the whole picture for them, the truth is that background is generally very undifferentiated as a result of the fact that most of us have never really done that kind of exploration, at least not in this particular way. So that process of the figure formation becomes rigid or habitual, right? So what happens is that I have all this background and I have issues with my mother. I'm angry with my mother for the way she's treated me. I'm 19. And all I can tell you, I go into therapy, I can complain about my mother for hours. I can give you very clear examples of things that she's done that were inappropriate. I can go on and on and on and on. But what I'm going on about is that which is habitual and rigid, relating to the past environment rather than the here and now, because mom isn't in the room. So the awareness of what's actually occurring inside of me as a result of whatever happened with my mom, I'm not even noticing that. I am so lost in my story about mom that I'm not aware of any connection. I don't have any contact with that awareness or that boundary, that story. I don't have any contact with it in myself. So in certain states like acute anxiety, figure formation is rapid, poorly differentiated from the ground from which it emerges, leading to a cluttering of incomplete gestalts. So I have this anxiety every time I think about my mom. I can talk about this incident, but I never finish it. I never have a sense of having resolved it or completed it or made full contact with it. Okay. So conventional therapies will, by their nature, the technique of conventional therapy is based on the theory that what the person lacks, the patient lacks, is an understanding of the whys of their behavior. And that the why can be uncovered if we dig deep enough into the past, into the dreams, into the unconscious, that somehow if we can get to the why, that's going to make the difference. Like if I understand it, then I can be finished with it. So the assumption is that by recalling and reinterpreting the events of the past, the therapist and the patient together can piece out the effects of the patient's experience on him. Once they've done this, you'll no longer be disturbed by this. So what I want to say is that my experience with this is that when I was in graduate school many years ago and came to realize that I had issues that I really wanted to work on with a therapist, I went to the therapist. I'd been thinking about these things for a long time. And I told the therapist everything that I had been thinking about, the things that had been troubling me, the conclusions I'd come to. And because I was smart and I was in graduate school and I was always interested in psychology anyhow, all of that was easy for me to do. I could make those connections, but I never felt different. I never felt resolved. I never felt like anything changed. It was still there, right? Even though I understood it, nothing had happened. And then I went to a Gestalt therapist and I said, I don't want to talk about all of that. I want to be able to resolve the things that are troubling me. And my contract with the Gestalt therapist, who was also somatic, was that I wouldn't have to talk about it. I could be with my body around it and we work through the body. So instead of top down, we worked bottom up. Everything in my life changed. So that's when I decided that this was the therapeutic intervention that was most useful to me. So in Gestalt, we don't believe that there's a self that resides exclusively inside me, only a self that's created by the process of making contact with the environment. So think about what that might mean to you. So in this regard, we're talking about the self as a sense of identity. This is who I am, but who I am is created in the process of making contact with the environment that I live in. So the self that I'm bringing to the table right now might be different than the way in which I experience myself, or the experience of my authenticity, what's alive in me in this moment, will change from moment to moment. What it allows for is the I-thou relationship. I often think of I-thou as recognizing that the place of authenticity and respect and grace that lives within me also lives within you. It reminds me of the word namaste, right? Where there's the I and the thou. So I am present with you, you're present with me, and between us, that becomes actually the environment within which we are going to be communicating, that we'll be experiencing one another and whatever else emerges from that phenomenological background. This is where I think the skills that you learn in meditation counselor class are really important. This is where I think we have the opportunity to be fully present with someone, because we can be present with ourselves. And as we make contact, things have an opportunity to change. So imagine being in a therapy room with somebody, like I was in that first experience, with a woman was sitting back and just listening to me. But there was no sense of I, thou. It was more I, it. I was speaking, and this is the vessel that was there, but the act of listening, that sense of responsive listening, that sense of presence was not there, right? There was a detachment that didn't allow for real connection. You see? So that I, thou, when I moved to the other therapist, was that now I was in presence with her. And in that experience of presence with her, I was able to actually make more contact with myself. If you have any questions, please just interrupt. So the awareness continuum is what I wanted to mention. The aim of Gestalt awareness is to be in contact with your own existence and what is happening, what's occurring, what's alive in me at this moment in time. And implicit within this aim is the freeing of blocks that inhibit the flow between figure and ground experience, because we'll go from figure to ground to figure to ground. The aim of Gestalt therapy is the awareness continuum, the freely ongoing Gestalt formation, where what is of greatest concern and interest to the organism, the relationship, the group or society becomes Gestalt, comes into the foreground where it can be fully experienced and coped with, so that it can then melt into the background and leave the foreground free for the relevant next Gestalt. Does that make sense? So that's how the awareness continuum works. I think about any of you who may have experienced or been interested in EMDR. Part of what EMDR allows for is just a particular technique to do it with the bilateral stimulation, but what it actually allows for is that something that's been in the background to become the figure. And as it becomes the figure, the method of EMDR allows the individual to have contact with that figure and complete the Gestalt. That's why EMDR is successful. And there's a lot of neuroscience now that, and research that has certainly validated that being able to bring that from the background into the foreground and complete the Gestalt really matters to the amygdala. It matters to our own brain, how we do that. It matters in terms of how we're able then to let, as we say in EMDR, you let that then become a narrative memory rather than a charged traumatic memory. So let's talk about contact boundary for a minute. When we meet our environment and withdraw from it, for example, our skin, senses, we also make contact with our intuition, our felt sense. This is Geldin's work, and you'll be looking at this when you do focusing, read the book Focusing. True contact comes from the Gestalt formation of making sense of our world, comes from the whole situation, both the person and the environment, not a fixed point. So it's fluid, like the shoreline meeting the sea. Permeable enough to let in intimacy and nurturing, and impermeable enough to maintain autonomy. So the contact boundary is the point at which one experiences the me in relation to that which is not me. Contact boundary allows us to distinguish what we talked about earlier, which we call confluence. And so through contact, the me and the not me are both clearly experienced. There's a distinction, and distinction is really important as we establish contact boundary. To me, it's one of the keys, actually, is to be able to refine our ability to identify where the distinctions are. So the Gestalt cycle of experience, there's the for contact, energy surfacing in response to a sensation. So the sensation perhaps is hunger. We make contact, we mobilize to make contact with the environment to go in search of food. We have the final contact, is the figure and the rest of the body and environment fading into the background as we are eating and tasting the food. Post-contact, the immediate figure is satisfied and recedes into the background, making room for a new Gestalt to emerge. You're hungry, you go in search of food, you eat the food, that's the final contact, and then it's completed, and so it fades into the background. And that Gestalt cycle of experience is what happens as we go through the awareness continuum. This is Zinker's awareness excitement contact cycle. Basically, he says that action, mobilization, awareness, sensation, withdrawal is the process that we just described. So the environment is where it's all sitting. The self is relating to the environment. There's the final contact, the sense of satisfaction, and the withdrawal. But there's interruptions to contact. And that's interestingly that, so if we think about this in terms of what are the roots of Gestalt, what Pearls was seeing is that Freud had identified areas that he called defenses. What Pearls calls them is interruption to contact. Now, why it is that we would have that interruption to contact is based in that whole phenomenological, environmental training habit that we have as a result of whatever life delivered as we were developing. We all come up with strategies to handle life. And it doesn't necessarily mean that life is bad or that every person has been abused. It means simply that we've come up with strategies that make sense within what we call child logic that doesn't really serve the adult in the same way. Makes sense to a kid, but may not make sense to an adult. So creative adjustments that originally were formed in relation or situation at the time as the best possible way of managing the situation at the time now become habits and interruptions to real contact with what we feel. Now, the probably gross example would be, a dramatic example would be being in a family where you're not allowed to feel at all. So you don't make contact to feelings ever. And if they start to show up, you immediately shut them down by using one of these interruptions to contact, which Freud called resistance or defenses. But Pearl says these are really just the natural way in which we begin to make sense of our world. They interrupt contact. Our job as a Gestalt therapist is to support our client in being able to make contact. So that's where distinction comes in. We need to distinguish what is an interject, what is a projection, how does that feel in our body, how do we experience that, and begin to identify the interruptions to contact. So in summary, for now, you might experience something is inside which belongs on the outside. This is introjection. Or experiencing something which is outside that belongs in you. This is projection. Or you might experience no boundary between your organism and your environment. That's confluence. Or you might experience a fixed boundary with no fluid change. This is retroflexion. Does this make sense? Any questions? This is the awareness continuum exercise handout. So pretty much what you just did. Tell me what you're aware of now, what you're experiencing in your body. Tell me more, say more. Say more about whatever the sensation. Describe what you're aware of right now. Describe the sensation in whatever part of your body. Would you be willing to say more about that? How are you noticing? And then you can respond to, I notice that you're looking at the ground. Tell me what you're aware of as you look down. I notice tears welling up in your eyes. Tell me what you're aware of. I notice you're looking back and forth. Tell me what you're aware of. So these are all ways to work with the awareness continuum. Okay? So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Any thoughts about the exercise that you just did? Anything you want to share?